Hi everyone, thank you for joining our latest webinar, the GCC Traveller Preparing for 2022. This is a recording, so if you have any questions or would like to get in contact with us to discuss your own travel insight challenges, please just follow the contact options on the recording page that you're viewing this on. Firstly, I'd like to give a short introduction to DA, our team, and how we use new methodologies in consumer research to uncover unique insights in the region. DA is powered by Scylla, an Arabic native consumer intelligence platform. So this means that we are able to process consumer data and conversations in 21 Arabic dialects without any translation, and this is quite a unique offering in the region. Our AI technology is designed to analyse structured data in context, so there's no need for keyword searching and human intervention in data collection. What this means for us is that we have access to huge amounts of uninterrupted data on Arabic-speaking consumers. We've been collecting and analysing the travel consumer data for over 3 years as the pandemic took hold of the industry and interrupted behaviour and emotions across the board. But now as travel begins to open up and the world around us is starting to open its corridors, it is more important than ever for us to understand how travellers from the GCC region have changed. What are they looking for? What are their intentions for travel? And really understanding who the new traveller profiles are at the moment. So to discuss all of this and much more, I'm joined by Faisal Khan, VP of Products here at DA. Welcome, Faisal. So Faisal, you're going to take us through some highlights of the latest research that we've done here at DA and that you spearheaded for us. And that is part of a much bigger and in-depth research project that you've conducted recently. But today it'll just be the highlights. So over to you, and I'm interested to see what key points you will share with us today.
Thanks for that introduction. So I'm going to be taking you through some of the highlights of a study that we completed on the GCC Traveller. Today what I'm going to do is we have a detailed report, but just share highlights across different topics as far as you get the whys, whats, wheres of Traveller, of the GCC Traveller. But before when I actually get into the findings, I just wanted to give you some context of why GCC Travellers. So just to first align, the focus of this research is on the outbound travelers from GCC. And there's a reason for that. We often see a lot of data points and hear a lot of news around so many people, the number of people coming into the Dubai airport, visiting Dubai, visiting the UAE. It's one of the top destinations globally. In the recent past, we've heard a lot about Saudi, where the government's actively, as a part of their Vision 2030, kind of talking about all the tourism that's happening within Saudi. FIFA is a big thing in Qatar, so a lot of kind of inbound traveling that's happening in Qatar. But what we don't talk enough about is the outbound traveler, the travelers that from GCC that are going out the world and kind of on holidays, on vacation, or whatsoever. And that's extremely important. And here are some kind of data points just to kind of set the context of the significance of this traveler audience from the GCC. So did you know that actually the GCC traveler is one of the highest spenders, not one of the highest, actually the highest spenders globally. They spend almost 6.5 times more than the average traveler globally. And if you kind of break this down by data, like by markets, by specific nationalities, it's the Saudis who spend the most amount of money when they're traveling abroad. And some of the numbers are here, but they're kind of crazy here. You've got, if you look at the same data points by per capita, you've got Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, who are spending as much if you talk from a proportion of the population. So in short, it's an audience that's relevant. It's important. It's important to the destinations, to the countries, to the tourism boards, to the travel experts sitting in these originating countries in the GCC countries, because these are people who are looking for holiday packages, wanting to go and explore the world. Why this audience is all the more interesting is because it's an audience that's evolving very quickly. it's a rapidly changing population in the GCC. I mean, you'd be aware that GCC has one of the fastest growing populations in the world, and the vast majority is under 25. And these young people are also happen to be a lot of them happen to be entrepreneurs, very young entrepreneurs. I mean, GCC is the home to the highest population of millennial entrepreneurs globally. So that means, what does that mean? That means more, disposable income, more expenses, a younger population. On the other hand, you've got gender dynamics that are changing, where you've got women entering the workforce, and that's kind of increasing at a multifold level. And that also means where your things you do while you're traveling, the decision making is going to change. So it's just overall an interesting, it's an important travel segment. It's an evolving one, something you'd like to keep track of, and see how it's kind of changing with times also. So while I've established the significance of, why is this travel segment so important? Why are the GCC travelers so significant? The way we've designed this entire research and findings is, from a strategic perspective, it is relevant to anyone who's wanting to attract the GCC travelers. So global tourism boards, agencies, travel experts, and of course, people from the originating countries. And basis this data, because you'll basis this data, you'll understand why they're traveling, where they're traveling, what do they want to do when they're traveling, who are they traveling with, who is this profile of people, what are the psychographic, demographic profile of these people, how can you break them down, are there differences by different profiles of people, and overall that gives you enough ammunition, so to say, to kind of work on your positioning strategies, work on your packages, work on your product service formulations, work on your overall tonality of the messages, the language you're using. So it kind of gives you enough data, information to be able to attract this audience and serve them well. Jess did help kind of give you a context of Scylla and how the entire kind of data is processed. So this research, the scope of this research was across GCC amongst the Arabic-speaking audience, and there were millions of data points. I mean, here are just some numbers plus 4 million comments that we evaluated and kind of analyzed. This was across 2 million plus unique users, and all these users we're talking about are users or posts that are travel related. So they're not general, but very specific to travel. And Scylla, our proprietary tool that helps us analyze and process and helps us understand all these millions of data points. So what you see in this presentations is actually the output of all the millions of data points that Scylla has helped us kind of process. And as human insights, we kind of interpreted that data to bring in relevance to each one of you out there. So just a quick snapshot. Again, still not the findings, still close to it, but all these millions of posts that you saw, where are they coming from? We did a quick demographic evaluation, and more or less pretty true to the natural fallout or the demographic profile of these countries. So of course, intuitively, you get most of your conversations happening in Saudi, and followed by Kuwait and UAE, and of course there's a share of the other three countries, which is Bahrain, Qatar, and Oman. But yeah, the big three are KSA, Kuwait, and Oman. Age is an interesting one. Age is an interesting one because almost 90% of the conversations right now on travel are happening with people who are 30 plus. There's a very small proportion of under 30, but primarily it's 30 plus. Yes, perhaps true to in some ways, but this is some true to the general population. But our guess is this is likely to change, slowly get younger with the changing population dynamics. The demographic dynamics are changing slowly, might get younger. But these are the people currently who have the disposable income, who are kind of planning for their travel and are the decision makers. Gender is pretty much a 60-40, where there's a skew towards female. Again, an interesting one. In the daily decisions, you do see men taking a lot of decisions and posting a lot of content, but when it comes to travel, there is a role that the female plays. Again, it's an interesting thing, especially if you look, we kind of broke down the data by ages, looking at the gender, and you do see that females are largely skewed by under 20, which is interesting. So a lot of young women actually talking about travel and wanting to travel. Dialects. We again broke down the data by the different dialects. So all the 4 million plus posts that you see, kind of broke them down. We analyzed what are the, because I mean, a lot of you know that there is a modern standard Arabic, there is a classical Arabic, but each of these countries have their own dialects, right? There are 21 plus dialects that Scylla is able to absorb, analyze, and we kind of break it down by country to see, is there anything interesting there? And there is, trust me, there is. All these conversations that in those waterfall bars that you see, the tall ones are actually the local dialects, and they're not the modern standard Arabic. And modern standard Arabic is primarily a tool that's used for a lot of communication purposes, but that's not how your consumers or travel audience is really reacting or responding or writing or engaging with travel content. It is primarily in their local dialects. Of course, countries like Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, where there's a slightly more population of expats, even in those countries, while standard Arabic is of a significant proportion, but the local dialect still is the one that's kind of taking most of the share. So that's just kind of breaking down and giving you a sense of the kind of demographic profile, the nationality slash dialects that's kind of emerging from the entire population. But let's get into the actual findings in terms of the behavioral, the attitudinal data on travel. Starting off with travel attitude. Oh, the travel industry suffered the most, right? Hasn't it? You've in the last 2 years, 3 years, post pandemic 2019 onwards, it's been disastrous for the travel industries. They've struggled. The people haven't responded well to all the lockdowns, all the stay at homes, to business closures. They've had to, they've just, the world came on a kind of, there was a full stop on everything, right? And travel was something that was hit most and for a longest duration more than anything else. So things started opening, but traveling was something which still didn't start open. That impacted not the industry, but the mindset at large. The mindset is the revenge mindset, right? What the revenge mindset is what we see now. So just to give you a, when we say revenge mindset, right, what do we really mean by it? So after all that pent up of emotions, energies, forces, you want to release those emotions, right? It's this urge to compensate. For so many of you, and as individuals we can relate, we had to cancel trips. We a lot of us lost money because we had booked tickets, couldn't go. Loved ones were separated. People didn't meet their children for the longest duration, didn't meet their spouse for some time. Plans were put on hold. So it was really a lot of, there was a lot of emotions that was just building up, and suddenly flights started open, we were back to normal. And this is the time where people wanted, there was a strong urge to compensate. So hence what you see here is a revenge that optimistic. It's about going out again, to see the world again, to meet loved ones again. And travel is hugely symbolic to the entire COVID phase and the mentality and the frame of mind people have suffered. And just to put support what I'm saying with some data out here, what you see in these numbers across 2019, 20, 21, what you see inside the numbers, inside the arrows, are the number of travel posts, and what you see is the unique users who've posted these. And just see how things changed in 2021. This is a time when they decided, when travel opened up, where people started roaming, like kind of traveling without any fear, and they just doubled. So it's just a huge kind of this sudden jump of interest, sudden jump of intent, sudden excitement that you can very clearly see post, once the borders opened up. Even 2022 has been exciting. We're already 4 months down, 2022, and there's a lot of positivity around travel. There's a lot of forecasts by various travel experts, media experts, talking about the proportion of people they're expecting to come in the different countries. For example, Oxford Economics and Visibility did a kind of a prediction study where they saw that it's going to double in 2022, and in 23 it's going to be further 50% higher. And again, these are just some examples, but 2022 is expected to be a much busier year, and people are expected to engage and interact with travel and travel content and make plans around travel much more than they are in 2021. Here's just to kind of also show some kind of trends to you. So what we did with Scylla, we have the ability to actually track data. So what we did is track travel content. So we looked right from, you know, 2021 to see if there are any kind of within 2021. While we understand 2021 is broader in terms of there was an interest to travel, but how has it been within that year? So what you see in the dark blue is the overall number of posts on travel across the year, and what you see in the lighter shade is what is a proportion of posts or conversations that indicate an intent to travel. So it's slightly predictive. So any kind of conversations that uh, where we could analyze and understand that this is talking about an intention to travel, a need to travel, you can see that that has been very true to the overall number of posts. So as the number of posts or content on travel increased, the intention also increased. So there are more and more. So it's not just vague conversations around travel or general conversations around, but there is a serious intent of the need to travel across the year, and it's only growing year on year. We analyze the data also by the sentiment in terms of how positive. So is this okay? There's a lot of conversation on travel happening, but is this really positive? Are people talking about some negative? Is there a lot of negative associations? And what's interesting, at least in the year 2021, it's been fairly positive and consistently so, because it's all about, there's been a lot of optimism, there's been a lot of hope, especially in the GCC, right? Because the way they've managed the pandemic, the way they've managed the entire travel rules, regulations, and how organized they've been, it kind of reflects on how consumers are talking and planning their travel. And largely on all this number of comments, you see the number of comments, you see the millions of comments that we've kind of analyzed, and we did a sentiment analysis, and they're largely positive. For that matter, in the detailed report, we actually break down this sentiment, the positive sentiments and the negative sentiments, into different emotions like fear, apprehension, happiness, surprise. So, what are the elements? And that really kind of helps you build the tonality and how you're kind of design or communicate with this audience who are willing to travel. So we've kind of established that, yeah, there is a clear uh, there's a very positive attitude to travel. There is a need to travel, and people are willing to travel. But what is it that's really driving them? What is it that they want to do while they're traveling? And like I a while back mentioned, that there's this whole thing of that feeling of caged that you had over the last 2 years, or consumers or travelers had over the last 2 years, and now they're kind of willing to kind of go free, want to travel freely, are trying to, almost like I said, the revenge mindset, and that kind of comes in their behavior also, where they're wanting to travel for kind of just escaping. That's the word they use. We want to escape, we want to break free. And what we thought was really interesting is this whole thing about unlike home. They've just had so much of home that they're not really looking at an experience that they're familiar with, or that's something they just really want to go and do something different. So a lot of new experiences, adventure, something they've not done before. So countries they've not visited before, things they've not done before, places they've not been, like kind of the kind of things they do they've not done before, and that kind of comes out very, very clearly. So very clearly, in a non-pandemic or a pre-2019 phase, you would have probably seen a significant proportion of vacations, work, medical treatment, visiting the family, studying. So all the needs of travel or the purposes of travel are well spread out. But because this is data post the pandemic, you very clearly see that need of escaping we were talking about breaking free, we were talking about, where it's just over indexed and hugely skewed on vacations. And it does, there are some differences by demographic profiles, and you'll see a lot more in the detailed report. But there's an interesting one here, just to kind of highlight it, that the only profile that it's different for is the profile which is the 30 to 40 years old, which have a huge over indexing on work related travel, which also indicates that there is a lot of travel that's work related for the profile, the young professionals that started, and that's significant. But otherwise, largely, family travel is still limited to vacations, and that's the key reason they're traveling. We further kind of, again, in the detailed report, break this down into further break down vacations, because there's the in vacations there's, I don't know, cultural tourism, you've got beaches, you've got nature, you've got shopping. So kind of break that down to see how you can further analyze vacations and what's it that uh, is what are the kind of insights there. And again, within those you see differences by demographics and gender also. So that's kind of where they're going in terms of what are the places they'd like to go to. Uh, this whole concept of staycation, of course, that was huge. It was globally post the pandemic, once the kind of news broke down. Staycations as a concept uh, became huge, and it was a global trend. And UAE or Saudi or Qatar or basically the GCC countries behaved no differently from the entire globe, and kind of followed the trend of staycation. So staycation continues to be an important trend. uh, Interestingly, when I say staycation, it's also not necessarily within the country, but also intra GCC. So you see a lot of people kind of visiting a Saudi, coming to the UAE going to a Saudi, going to a Kuwait, and especially within these three countries, or the people from Bahrain coming to Saudi and UAE. So that's there. And I'm calling that as a part of the staycation because travels are easier, the borders are closer, so it's not extensive travel. And of course, the residents within each country do a lot of staycation. But zooming out of staycations, there is of course a lot of general traveling outside that's happening across real borders, outside the GCC, across outside the Arab world. So you've got Europe, which has been a popular destination anyway. You've got countries like UK, France, Germany emerging there. You've got Turkey, China, Maldives, then the North Americas, which you've got. But this data gives you a very, like, it kind of gives you an overview at a GCC level. Where this data becomes interesting, which you won't see in this demo, but just to kind of give you an example, where it becomes interesting when you break this down by country. So you see some, I think, 17, 18 countries on this list. But when I break it down by countries, it might give a different picture. For example, the UAE. So out of these 17, 18 countries that you see on the slide right now, there's no Israel, right? But when you break down data by UAE, you see Israel as an important destination. It's actually one of the top three destinations people are planning to visit. So it just becomes more interesting when you kind of start looking at different priorities and where people are wanting to go. And then you can look at that data by country, by intention. Moving on to the traveler profile. So you know why they're going, you know the fact that they want to travel, why they want to travel. You also have a sense of where they're wanting to travel. But I think for any strategic implication when you're doing any kind of positioning work, messaging, or any of the travel or even product kind of designing, etc., it's also critical to know who your audience is, who you're talking to, and because that forms the premise of everything, and a significant proportion of our insights and findings are premised on who your audience is, a very clear understanding. Of course, we did touch upon basic demographic numbers, but it's really where the positioning or where the strategic implications come when you understand the psychographics, the personality, the values, the needs, because that how can I trigger this consumer or this traveler to come to my country, or to get them to travel, or to kind of get them to engage with my products and services. And how we, just to before I kind of talk about it, how we do this psychographic understanding or personality insights is basically on all the base you saw of unique users. We go into their historic conversations, historic posts, the kind of real world engagement they're reflecting through their posts, as well as the words, adjectives they're using and how they're describing. It's and based on all that data, again using the capabilities of Scylla, we're able to infer the personality of the people, the values that drive them, the needs of these people, and it gives you a complete picture. So I just have, again, very few highlights to kind of just show you in terms of broadly what kind of data emerges from personality. But you've got what we call as to understand the personality, we understand the five big characteristics. This was something that was developed by IBM and Watson originally, but of course we've layered the Arabic audience on this, so it's a much more relevant understanding from an Arabic audience perspective. But you've got the five big characteristics, and what we don't have here, and of course we have in the detailed report, is also each of this characteristic is further divided into six facets. that gives us more understanding. So we've analyzed this data by country, and this kind of gives you an overview. So even if you look at this chart right now, you'll start seeing some differences where you've got a Saudi profile which is high on, being compassionate and cooperative with others and acting in an organized or a thoughtful way is very different from someone from a, let's say, we see some Bahrain data, or sorry, Kuwait data, where they're kind of talking about extroversion that's seeking stimulation in the company of others. So they're more group travelers. They're kind of talking about the social element of traveling. So there are differences you'll see by country, and how the personality is different. If again, this is a summary of a summary, so to say, but kind of giving a perspective that largely GCC per se, of course, you'll see differences by countries, and when you analyze the needs, the values of each of these audiences, the facets within, you'll see much more finer differences. But broadly speaking, the audience or the GCC is what we call as openness, which is basically, they're open to new ideas, experiences. These travelers will have a broad range of interest, adventurous spirit, high levels of creativity. So and just to kind of give you an example how this is relevant from a traveler perspective, it just kind of in terms of how you're designing your itinerary, how much what you're communicating them. So in your communication, there's a lot of new things they can do, new adventures, new food they can experience, and it could be such a packed, even in the itinerary, the planning can be that there's so much to do in so little time. It's just creating that sense of how there's just so much new things you can experience, right? And this kind of ties in with the entire story that we've been building, the whole revenge mindset, which is more attitudinal, behaviorally, how they're wanting to break free and go to places and just go on a vacation to kind of just have a good time and disconnect from all the pressures, all the tough times they've had in the last 2 years of staying at home. So overall, that kind of brings us to an end of the findings, or giving you some kind of a broad level and overview of the findings. But eventually what we are hoping for is that this kind of all these findings put together, a detailed version, a clear understanding of who your traveler is, where they're wanting to go, what they're wanting to do, why are they traveling, where they're traveling. Overall, it kind of gives you a reason to just connect with them better, and design and overall prioritize the packaging of your products and services, your positioning strategy. How do I influence them? What are the needs, and how can I leverage my understanding of their values and needs to kind of convert them as customers, from general travelers to my customers, or get them to come to my country. A lot of messaging tonality. So yeah, overall, it kind of gives you and answers all the W's, the H of related to travel. So that's it. Thank you. Over to you, Jess.
Thank you so much. It's so interesting to just capture even the highlights of the report that you've put together. It's fascinating to see how the pandemic has completely transformed an entire industry. But at the point that you made at the beginning, it's not just about the industry itself, it's about the entire mindset of the consumers of that industry, of course. And it goes much, much deeper than, we were stopped and now we're allowed. It actually has changed their entire behavior and mindset. So it's fascinating. And I just want to really reiterate on the point that you mentioned throughout the presentation, that these are merely highlights of a much bigger piece of study that you've completed. And what you've done today that I want to share with everyone is that you've given a snapshot of each of the chapters, the 4 big chapters or 5 big chapters. And within that, there's a huge array and depth that you've gone into that is actually available for people to purchase. And all of that information to purchase this amazing report on GCC Travellers will be available on the page that you're watching right now of this recording. And also important to note for everyone out there, if you're wondering, this is completely customizable. So if you would like to understand, for example, a particular market, a destination, so you might be interested in exactly how GCC travellers are feeling and intending to travel to Spain, just as an example. Or perhaps you'd like to deep dive into a certain type of persona. Maybe it's the student travellers that you're interested in, and we can do a full study on that. So please do get in contact with us. Firstly, if you would like to access the larger report that we've been through today, or if you'd like to talk to us about bespoke research. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.